A, we got an A, a B, and a C. So make sure we're on an A here. We're going to be looking at Nehemiah chapters 3 and 4. Started the book of Nehemiah last week and got a little bit, at least, into the names of some of the opposition that Nehemiah and the Jews are going to face throughout the book itself. Let's start with question number 1, though, a think about it question or discussion question. It's really a question to kind of get everybody awake more than anything. But the question is this: what have you found is the best way to accomplish an overwhelming task? Maybe different for each person, but
I tell my kids with homework, big projects, I need to delegate one bite at a time.
One bite at a time. Okay, that's good advice. YouTube. Yeah, I've been there a time or two.
I'll break it down into smaller tasks.
Okay.
Kind of do a order.
Okay, that's a good idea there. I didn't even think of that one, but that'd be an excellent way to do that. Kind of show progress on the way. Sometimes it gets kind of overwhelming if you look at the whole thing. But if you kind of break it down into bits and pieces and say, well, I got that done, then you encouragement, I guess, at least to continue on. Anything else?
Look at it, size it up, and tie into it.
That's kind of my experience. You know, best way to accomplish it is just get in there and do it, and don't let up till it's done. Because if you let up, or you say, you know what, I'm gonna stop and take a break for a little while, what generally happens?
You won't get back.
Don't get back to it, do you? Kind of hard to get back to it. There's some bad ways, though, to try to accomplish an overwhelming task, and I think probably all of us have been guilty of some of these things. But one of the things that I often do with those difficult tasks is say, well, I'll do that tomorrow, you know, or I'll do it when I feel like doing it. You know, when that is, usually doesn't happen, but that's the attitude. So I think really the best way is just jump in and do it. And again, just keep on and keep on. Don't let up until it's done. All right, so we're going to talk about the building of the wall, read about the building of the wall. And I think what you'll find as we go through this study tonight is that's really what the children of Israel did. You know, they were facing an overwhelming task when you think about rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, rebuilding the gates of Jerusalem itself. The way that they got it done was they just jumped in and they just kept on working until it was done. And great example, I think, for us, especially within the Lord's church today when it comes to doing God's work. All right, let's talk a little bit about chapter 3. We're going to read about some of the people who helped build on the wall, talk a little bit about them and, you know, what we can learn from that, how we can apply that to our lives today. Question number 2, we've kind of already answered that, but what project were the Israelites working on? Why did Nehemiah go back? Rebuild the wall, right? And you'll read about a lot of that included the gates. You read about a lot about the gates here that were being rebuilt too. But what we learned is that these gates had been burned down. They'd been burned up with fire. So gates were basically non-existent. The wall itself had been broken down. And so there was a lot of rubble and a lot of debris left from the wall. The walls weren't set on fire, but the gates certainly were. The gates were burned up. The wall was generally made out of stone. You know, gates would have been more wood and things like that in it. So they had to rebuild both of those things in order to accomplish the task at hand. And I think they understood, you know, what point was there in making any, whether it's, you know, personal improvements to your home or to the city of Jerusalem, when nothing was safe from invasion or plunder. It wouldn't make much sense, would it? And they knew they had to secure these walls before they could ever start really improving the city and improving their own lives too. But, you know, these were people who'd been back here for a while, hadn't they? And there still wasn't the progress that there was supposed to be. And I think a lot of people just kind of became complacent. That's easy to do sometimes. I think they just kind of, sit back and decide this is what it's going to be like. This is going to be the new norm. We're just not going to have any gates, and we're not going to have any walls, and, we're not going to be able to improve our city or improve our houses and, have to worry about people invading or taking those things that we're improving on. So I think a lot of them had probably just, became accepting of the state that the city was in and basically satisfied. This is just it, and we're going to live with it and make the best with what we have. So, question number 3 here: you read about the priests; they get involved in the building of this wall. But how did the priests set the example for all the Israelites to follow? Who were the priests? I mean, what was their role?
To give sacrifices was really what they were supposed to do.
Okay. Service in the temple was certainly part of it, wasn't it? Is that the only thing they did? They're also responsible for teaching the people. That was part of their job too. So why would they be building out here on this wall? Yeah. They were basically the spiritual leaders of the children of Israel. And one of the great lessons, of course, that we know not only from the pages of God's Word, but also from experience, is if your leaders set the example in the work, that's generally a good thing, isn't it? And so if you have these guys out here, now understand this too, you think about the priesthood, the Levitical priesthood in the Old Testament. These guys just didn't sit back in, office chairs all day, right? They were hands-on people. I mean, they worked during the day. There was service that was involved in the temple. A lot of animal sacrifices, a lot of filleting out the animal, separating the parts, skinning the animal, doing all those things. That was part of the work that they did on a daily basis. So they were people who were generally involved in physical labor. They were no strangers to that. But it is kind of the case, if the leaders set the example in the work, then that motivated, I think, the rest of the people to get involved too. And so you read about them getting involved. And of course, they should have been involved because it was something that was for the glory of God, wasn't it? And they were people who were supposed to be concerned with those type of area, or that type of area. So, you look at these people, and I think what you'll find is, as we go through these lists of these builders and some of the people and what they did and what they didn't do, I think you'll see that's kind of a general reflection of humanity. And it's kind of a general reflection of workers in the church today. You're going to read about some of these people and, what they did and what they were able to accomplish. But, human circumstances change, but does human behavior change very much over the years? Not really. I mean, generally, you're going to find the same human behavior in every era of time as from the beginning. So, we read about some men, question number 4 here, from the area of Tekoa. And what there was a criticism that's mentioned here about some of those men. What was that criticism?
They didn't try very hard.
Okay, they didn't try very hard. Anybody else want to expound on that a little bit?
Important people didn't work.
Yeah, the hires up, where were they? They weren't anywhere to be found when it came to the work of Jerusalem, right? Why do you think that is? The Bible doesn't really say why they didn't work, but anybody got an opinion?
Maybe they thought they were above that kind of labor.
I mean, that's kind of the mindset of a lot of people in the upper upper ranks of society today, isn't it? You know, they're beyond manual labor. That's for common people. And that could have very well been the case. We're not really told why, but we are told that they didn't even work on one area when it came to rebuilding the wall or rebuilding the gates. So when you think about the Christian and of course, work and laboring, which Christians are supposed to do the work? There you go. Yeah, that was a loaded question there. All of them, right? Does that involve the high ranking? Yeah. Does it involve the common people? Yeah. Does it involve everybody in between? Yeah. So everybody is supposed to be involved in the work itself. And, you read in the scripture, the idea about work, we can go back to the Garden of Eden, but listen, God intended for man to be busy, didn't he? Even when he placed him in the perfect world, he had work that he gave them to do. And I think about men like Paul. You know, Paul preached the gospel. Did he work too?
Yes.
What did he do?
Tent maker.
Tent maker. What about Jesus? Did he do any work?
Yeah.
What did he do? He was a carpenter, wasn't he? So it's one of those principles that you think about in the scripture. You know, we as people are supposed to be busy. And one of those areas in which we're supposed to be working and laboring is, of course, when it comes to the Lord's work. I think sometimes people, and maybe even we ourselves, are guilty of thinking about the church as a place of rest. You know, we come in here and we sit in these padded pews and, our air conditioning and our heat. And then, we think, well, if plate goes by, it's my job to put a little money in the plate and, listen to the preacher and listen to the Bible class teacher. But do we think about the church as an area or a realm of work? Because it is. It's a work that we're supposed to be involved in. And it's all right to do those things. You know, we're supposed to worship. I understand the importance of that too. But there's also work that has to be done within the church. And I don't think it ever enters into the mind of some people that, hey, I'm here to work. You know, it's my job to actually do the work of the Lord. But all of us are supposed to be involved when it comes to that area. Question number 5 here, you read through chapter 3, you'll find this wide spectrum of different people that are involved in the work. In fact, I think there's 38 different individuals that are mentioned in that chapter as workers, 42 different groups or types that are mentioned throughout the chapter. You read about men, you read about women, you'll read about professional craftsmen that are involved, you'll read about ordinary people that are involved within this too. But just a broad spectrum of different people that are involved in this work. What does that tell you about Israel's commitment to this project?
It was a priority for them.
Yeah, and it's again to their credit when Nehemiah talked to them and said, we need to do this and we can do it, and they all said, yeah, we're going to do it. That's the same thing they said whenever the law of Moses was given to them too, though, right? And they made a covenant there. But to their credit, they kept their end of the bargain, didn't they? Everybody was involved in this work. And it's just like the Lord's church today. I mean, God uses all kinds of people. He can use all kinds of people. We don't have to be an expert craftsman for God to use us in His work and in His service. But that's what it takes. You get everybody involved, it makes the job a lot easier, doesn't it? Always going to be easier. The more hands you have involved, the easier the job is going to become, and the more work you're going to be able to accomplish. And so that was Israel at this particular time when Nehemiah returns. Question number 6 here, keeping in mind the practical reasons for the restoration of the city. There's some practical applications we've talked about. Why do you think most of the initial building was, at least, or rebuilding, was focused on the gates of the city?
If you have a wall, you build a wall, you don't have a working gate, you don't really have any protection.
Yeah, the gates the gates were pretty important because that's your main entrance and exits out of the city. And so the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to build some gates to control who's going to come in and who's going to go out in these entrance and these exits. Now, again, if you think about mode of attack, where would the most likely place be where an army or a group of invaders is going to enter into the city and attack? It's going to be the gates, right? Because that's the one main area that's going to be clear.
Well, they make wood, they could actually burn that.
Yeah. And we talked about, or I mentioned the idea, a lot of these walls, they were broken down, but there was still a lot of rubble. If you were trying to invade a city, you weren't going to try to climb over all these rocks and half a wall in order to get into the city. So the gates was kind of at least the initial focus in getting those established.
Why do you suppose they had so many gates?
I don't know. I mean, Jerusalem was a big city.
What they have? 9? I counted 9 at least.
Yeah, at least. I was thinking there was 12, but there's at least 9. Yeah. But it was a big city. And, matter of convenience, I guess, getting in and out of the city so you didn't have to walk all the way across from one end to the other maybe, or I don't know. There were different, and they used different gates for different reasons. They had specific purposes behind some of these gates. Some of them were spiritual. Some of them involved worship and sacrifice. Others, of course, would have been, ordinary day or mode of travel. And that doesn't necessarily mean this too, that every gate in the city was open all day long. Some of these gates would have been open on specific days and for specific reasons. So, but it would have been a big job to try to rebuild all those different areas, and that's kind of what they focused on. That was important for the safety of the people, and that was important so you could control who was going to get in and who could get out of the city. All right, let's talk a little bit about chapter 4 here, about some of the opposition that Nehemiah begins running into as they're rebuilding the wall. We read about last week 2 different guys, Sanballat and Tobiah. We'll read about them several times throughout the book of Nehemiah, but question number 7 here, as you begin chapter 4, Sanballat becomes angry with the Jews. Why is that?
He perceived that as a threat to his authority.
Yeah, we're not really told the exact position that these men occupied. I think Tobiah is mentioned as an official of some sort, but I think it's pretty safe to say that these guys were some type of key political figures in that particular area. And so when the Jews come back and when they start rebuilding the walls, or at least they hear about them, wanting to, and then they start hearing about the progress that they're making on it, I think they're viewing them as a threat to them, and not only them, but also, any of their other associates throughout that particular area. Why would they not want the walls rebuilt?
Because they had control over them.
Yeah, it would keep the Jews weak, and if you're weak, you're dependent, right? Didn't want them to be independent, didn't want them to be self-sufficient. They wanted them to have to rely upon these officials, for help and aid and things like that. And that helped them, obviously, control the people to some extent. And so they realized, if this happens, then they're going to be this strong and independent people, and that's going to endanger the balance of power in this particular region. And so they're not going to be as powerful probably as they once were. Would have robbed them of influence, also would have taken away some of their wealth. No doubt they relied upon, payment in order to take care of some of these people and the things happening there. We learned an important lesson, though, and this is one I think that is so easy to overlook in the church today, and when it comes to doing God's work. When things are going really well, do you think Satan is alert to that? Think he's concerned about that? when we're accomplishing a lot of God's work, when things are going good, I think Satan often has a way of, interjecting himself into the picture and kind of trying to destroy a good thing, stop a good thing. And so one of the underlying lessons that I get from studying the book of Nehemiah is when things are going well, you better start looking for trouble because it's going to be coming. I mean, Satan is going to be doing everything that he can to try to destroy the good work that's going on. So we know the enemy doesn't want to see God, and Satan we're talking about, he doesn't want to see God's work prosper, doesn't want to see it making progress. And as long as these people in Jerusalem were just kind of content in the state that they were in, the enemies left them alone, didn't they? But as soon as they start doing God's work, that's when the enemies come and they start launching their attacks and they start being concerned. But I think that, again, that's kind of a good lesson to think about in the Lord's work in the church today. So question number 8 here on your handout, what did Sanballat and Tobiah do to try to discourage the Jews from rebuilding the walls? What's the first tactic they used?
First, they just talk.
Yeah, the first thing that they did is they just ridiculed them or they made fun of them. And if you remember back in chapter 2 and verse 19, this was actually something that started even before the work itself started. When they heard the Jews had come back and Nehemiah had come back to rebuild the wall, it says there in verse 19, they laughed at us and despised us and said, what is this thing that you are doing? They did their best to try to discourage them by making fun of them. Sometimes I think we read about in the scripture, persecution and different things that are done against Christians or followers of God who are trying to accomplish the Lord's work. I think sometimes we underestimate making fun of people. Is that a real discouragement that causes people to stop doing stuff? Yeah, it can be if you're not mentally strong. Can be. And so that's what Sanballat and Tobiah did. We read about how, basically they go in front of the Samaritan army, and probably not only them, but probably a lot of other major officials in that area. And they began making fun of what the Jews were trying to accomplish or what they were doing. And there's several ways that they did it. The first thing that they did is they called them feeble. What does that mean? Yeah, weak. I kind of think about it from the standpoint of, withered up. Or something like when you take a flower, you cut a flower and it starts to shrivel up and wither. So these were people who were like a cut flower that was fading away. When you stop and you think about, the root and the resources of what they were doing, I think these guys thought there's no way. There's no way they have the manpower. There's no way that they have access to the resources. There's no way that they're ever going to be able to accomplish this great task. And so that's one of the things that they talk about is how feeble these people were. They also ridiculed the work itself, though, didn't they? And one of the things that they made fun of was the people themselves. I mean, how many of these guys do you think were professional builders? Very limited number, right? And so he starts, saying, are they going to build it themselves? These guys, they're not builders. They're not craftsmen. And they're going to rebuild a wall. And they're going to rebuild the defenses of an entire city. Never going to happen. Not going to be able to accomplish that task. Also mentions the idea of sacrifice. It made fun of the fact that they were relying upon God to protect them and to provide for them and to bless them in this work. And basically they said, you're going to have to offer more sacrifices in order to build this wall. You're going to have to do something different than just sacrifice to your God. They also talked about, are they going to finish it in a day? What do you think that means? Yeah, they didn't know. They said these guys don't know how difficult job this is going to be. You know, they think they're going to go out here in one day and rebuild this wall, and they're going to be done, and you know they're going to quit. They're going to become discouraged. It's going to be too much for them to bear. And then they also ridiculed some of the building materials they were using. Right? What did they make fun of?
Usually they burned up wall.
Yeah, using these stones that had been burned. Well, if you read the narrative, the gates were what was burned. The walls weren't burned. The walls were made of stone. I've never seen somebody burn a stone, but you know, it is true that if you burn limestone, it does weaken it to some extent. But I think it is also true there was a lot of salvageable material that was still left in all this rubble. And so this is just another one of their attempts, you know, to make fun of them and try to discourage them from rebuilding. And then you have Tobiah. You know, he makes this comment where basically he says, you know, you don't need an army to knock this wall down. All you need is a fox. You get a fox to walk on top of this wall, and it'll fall down in a hurry. So that they tried to make fun of them in order to get them to stop the great work that was being accomplished. So question number 9 here, how did Nehemiah respond to the taunts of his enemies?
He asked God to put reproach upon them.
Yeah, he basically asked God to take care of the matter, didn't he? And, you know, this is probably a good lesson for us too. But if you try to answer every ridicule that's thrown your way, what's going to happen? You're not going to have time to work, are you? And so Nehemiah could have stopped everything, and he could have went over there and said, "Hey, listen, you guys are making fun of us. I'm going to refute, you know, this ideas that you're throwing out here." Well, the work would have stopped, wouldn't it? And so Nehemiah said, here's what we're going to do. We're just going to keep on working. And we're going to pray to God, and we're going to ask God to take care of the matter. And again, I think a pretty good lesson for us today. Anybody familiar with what we call the imprecatory Psalms in the book of Psalms? There's like 5 different categories of Psalms that you'll find throughout the book of Psalms itself. But one of the categories that has been labeled or invented by men is what's called the imprecatory Psalms. And these are Psalms that basically, they're prayers to God, a lot like Nehemiah's prayer here, where they call on God to bring justice upon the enemy. And it's not the matter of, you know, personal vengeance that people were looking for, but it's really, and it deals with Nehemiah too, by making fun of God's people and blaspheming God's people. Who were they making fun of and blaspheming? God himself, right? And so basically Nehemiah is calling for God to defend his arm. You know, come down and take care of these guys who are blaspheming you, making fun of you, and you know, trying to attack you. And a good lesson for us today. I think, is it the book of Romans that mentions Elijah praying against Israel? Yeah, I think in Romans chapter 11, somewhere down in those verses, Elijah made the prayer against Israel. Remember when he said, they killed all the prophets, and now they're after me. And he called on God to bring vengeance upon Israel. Not personal vengeance, but again, the idea: defend your honor, defend your people, and come to the call of the cause. And that's basically what Nehemiah was praying for here. You know, you think about this making fun of and ridiculing. I think that's one of the areas maybe we underestimate when that Satan uses to keep us from doing things that he wants us to do. Because generally what happens when somebody makes fun of you for doing something?
You lose your confidence.
Okay, you lose your confidence, and if they made fun of you the first time when you did it and you were around them, you're probably not going to do it a second time, are you? Because you know they're going to make fun of you. And that's what the enemies of God's people were hoping for. They were hoping that they could embarrass them enough so that they would quit. And, I think, again, a lot of times maybe we say something and, when it comes to a religious discussion and somebody makes fun of us and maybe it embarrasses us a little bit. And so the next time around, we think, I'm not going to say anything this time. It is a tactic that Satan often uses. But what should we do? Well, prayer and perseverance is the answer. That's what Nehemiah and Israel did. Not quitting or giving up is not the answer, right? Question number 10 here. So according to Nehemiah, why were the Jews so successful in their work? In verse 6, we read that they completed the wall to half of its original height. Why were they able to do that? What was the mark of their success? Or the reason behind it?
Says they had a mind to work, but I think it was also the faith that God was behind them at the same time.
Yeah. That's one of the great underlying lessons too throughout the book of Nehemiah is a great faith. The faith that Nehemiah had, remember, to approach the king, to ask him to even come back, to ask him for the resources, to go back himself, to approach the people. As he faces all this adversity throughout the book, keep on doing it, not giving up. But they certainly had a great faith, didn't they? And they also had a mind to do the work. And that's both those things are key to the success in any realm when it comes to doing God's work. Even though they faced this constant scorn and ridicule, they just continued to diligently work on the project. And the result was, again, they restored the wall to half of its original height. But that's the key. I mean, if you don't do the work, is it going to get done? That's the only way it's going to get done is if you do it. And they had that mind to do it. Question number 11 here. So what did Israel's enemies do when they heard of their success in rebuilding Jerusalem's walls? Build it back to half of its original height. What is the plan of the enemy now? Their ridicule, making fun of them didn't work, right?
They're attacking.
Yeah, 4 different groups you read about come together. And they said, we're going to put an end, we're going to stop this work. And the plan was basically to attack Jerusalem, kind of cause some chaos, and then people are going to be discouraged and they're going to quit working. But, I think about this principle. How many times in the scriptures do you read about the enemies of God uniting together, coming together, even though they're completely different? I mean, they come together to try to stop God's work. I think about in the New Testament, where you have the Pharisees and you have the Sadducees and you have the Herodians all come together to try to take care of Jesus. I wish sometimes as God's people we could unite as easily as some of these enemies do when it comes to stopping God's work. But they did come together and they decided we're going to launch this secret attack on Jerusalem and we're going to put a stop to the work itself. So question 12 here, how did Nehemiah and the Jews respond to the plots of their enemy?
Nehemiah put together a pretty detailed plan with several key points to protect the people and the rebuilding of the wall.
Yeah. And one of the things that he did is he created a guard, and that guard worked day and night. Obviously it wasn't the same people, but there was a rotation. But there was a guard that kept a lookout for any approaching enemies. And they did it during the day, and they did it all night too. And he, like Larry said, he made a detailed plan where an alarm could be sounded, and the moment that anybody heard this alarm, you dropped whatever you were doing and you ran to that spot. And so there was a lot of preparation and planning that Nehemiah went to encourage the people, don't stop working. Something happens or somebody starts coming, we'll see them. And if they do come here, we'll all rally together and we'll take care of it. So don't stop the work. Question number 13. You read about another tactic here that begins, or another situation that begins or arises that could potentially lead to the stopping of the work. That was complaining about fatigue and weakness and being overworked. You know, we read about Judah. They come, they say, listen, there's a lot of rubble. We've been moving all this debris. You know, we're working like dogs day and night. We work from the time the sun comes up till the sun goes down. We're just overworked and we're worn out. And what was Nehemiah's response to that?
You can't set up a perimeter on the outside in these weak places and walls, that people wait for people to attack them.
Yeah, well, that was the response of when these rumors start coming around that, you know, the attacks are imminent. But it is kind of interesting to me. People start complaining, and Nehemiah says, we just need to keep on working. Yeah, I know it's hard. I know it's hard work. I know it's tiring work. You know, I know it's long days, but we got to keep on working. We can't stop. Give up when we stop, the work's not going to get accomplished. And you know, that's true with anything, isn't it? Sometimes you get tired. Sometimes you get weak and worn out. And it's probably best if you just kind of hang in there and keep on going. But that's the answer that Nehemiah provided for these complaints of the heavy workloads and the long hours. Steve mentioned these rumors that started going around, you know, these threatening and intimidating rumors that armies and attacks were imminent, they were coming. And so Nehemiah devises another plan where any low spot in the wall, he posted a guard. So any of these areas where, you know, the enemies would have come in and tried to invade or attack, they were already fortified and defended. Half the people guarded the wall, half the people worked. And so the work kept going on. Work did not stop. There's a statement made toward the end of chapter 4 there in verse 23 about the people not taking off their clothes. And then there's some clarification offered, except to wash them. What do you think that means, though? What does it mean they didn't take the clothes off?
Always be ready. Be vigilant.
Yeah, they worked all the time. They just kept on working. They never quit. They never took off their clothes, no matter what the threat, no matter what the tactic was. They just kept on working. And so that's how they were able to accomplish this great task. Good lesson, a lot of application for us today. Anybody got any thoughts or comments or questions on chapters 3 and 4 there in Nehemiah?
You think these people were being compensated? Other than, you know, protection, rebuilding the wall?
I would say there were some of them who were. Yeah, I don't think everybody was. But I believe there probably were some key figures there who were being compensated. In fact, there's some people who come from outside the city and actually do some of the work. So I would imagine those were people who were probably, you know, professionals and probably got paid. But I would say most people were probably working for free.
What's the purpose of the half and the height?
Half the wall, that's just kind of a marker. They got it half.
Is that what was left and then they built it?
No, I don't think it was half left. I think it was just saying that they got half of its height built up.
Oh,
Yeah.
and it was still in high.
Yeah. There would have been some places that would have been completely broken down. Yeah. So